Good morning to you all, wherever you may be joining us from today, and welcome to this slightly unusual FEST conference. And as we really start to see, I guess, that the fog of COVID clearing, it really looks like some elements of our business and even our personal lives are starting to change forever. And I guess the real issue for us, both as suppliers and wholesalers to the plumbing, heating, renewable sector, is to understand exactly, what do these changes mean for our roles and our futures? And we constantly get asked around three broad topics. And those tend to be, how has COVID altered the behavior of our customers? Number one. What's the impact on our supply chain in the sector? And altogether, what does this mean for the impacted traditional role of the distributor and wholesaler? Now, by way of introductions, I'm David Moody, and I've worked in distribution in our sector for many years, as you can see, and across many countries. And I now work with CIL management consultants who have a specialist team in the built environment. And this morning, I'm joined by Stefan van Rompuy, who's a true leader in European retail and the retail trends. And these retail trends, of course, morning, Stefan.
Morning, David.
These retail trends are often seen as early indicators for our sector in trade distribution. And Stefan's going to be addressing these three main topics, following which we're going to be putting some questions and observations to our industry panel, who have kindly volunteered or been volunteered to focus on exactly what the implications are for our sector of these trends. So it's going to be a pretty busy session. And to make it work, we need all of your help. This is not just about pouring a coffee and listening. Firstly, during Stefan's session, we want to get your views on the three big topics. And to do that, towards the end of the session, we're just going to flag up three simple questions. And they just give you the chance to vote yes or no. We'll collate the responses in real time, we hope, and replay the results at the end of each session. It really represents the views of the whole FEST organization. So please do vote when we flag up those questions. The second area is that when Stefan has finished just highlighting these big retail trends, our panelists will be taking questions around the implications for our sector, both from the viewpoint of suppliers and of course from the viewpoint of distributors. We want you to supply some questions simply by typing them into the chat box. And I will attempt to collate them and direct them to the panelists. Don't worry, the questions can only really be seen by myself and the panelists, so be as pointed as you want to be during those questions. I can't promise to get through them all, but I will do my best. And if it looks like I'm spinning plates, it's probably because I'm trying to spin plates in this virtual conference. And just before I hand over to Stefan, to talk about the retail trends that are really driving the post-COVID world. I just want to recognize how pleased I am that the FEST organization has really moved to hold this meeting in the face of some obvious difficulties. Johan Stevens as president and the FEST leadership team could simply have, cancelled this particular event, as many have done. But I felt that these are serious issues that really need addressing. And we just didn't want to let COVID stifle this debate. So thank you and an excellent response. So really, without further ado, across to you, Stefan, and we look forward to hearing what you've got to say about these retail trends.
Yes, David. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here. One small warning for starters. I know very little about your specific industry. I follow the retail and consumer industry, which has maybe little to do, but the people are the same, of course. And I think we see some trends in retail that will have an impact on everyone's life and on every industry. And so your first question, David, was how has COVID impacted consumer behavior and buying behavior? And I think indeed that the pandemic hasn't so much changed consumer behavior, but accelerated some trends that were already ongoing, that were already happening. According to experts, COVID caused even a 7-year leap into the future. So trends were accelerating really, really fast. And many companies, many retailers as well, were taken by surprise. They weren't ready for this boom in e-commerce, for example. They didn't have a proper good web shop. They were starting to improvise, selling on Facebook, on WhatsApp. It's a bit strange because e-commerce isn't all that new. I mean, Amazon opened its first web store like 27 or 28 years ago. That's not yesterday. But you see this enormous evolution, and you see that now retailers are forced to evaluate their store portfolio. You see that trade shows are being canceled, and you see that we are having a webinar and not a physical congress. So something has changed. First question is, will this stick, or are we going to get gradually back to normal? Well, the virus isn't gone away yet. This is still lasting, and behavioral science says always that habits form. The longer a new situation will last, the longer a new habit will last, the higher the probability that it will stick. So I don't believe that we will ever go back to normal, to the pre-COVID situation. Something fundamental has changed, and it has not just to do with buying behavior, but it has to do with the way we live. It's much more encompassing than that. We are living increasingly digital lives. We all are, and we're getting more and more comfortable with that. And look at the big winners of the corona crisis, the big platforms like Amazon or Facebook. They're not just retailers. They're not just after our shopping budget. They're much, much more. They want our time, they want our lives, they want our data. See, Amazon is no longer the everything store, it's the everything company. They don't just sell stuff. They have their streaming services, they have these web services, they're into education, into healthcare, finance, insurance. They want to be everywhere. Facebook, exactly the same. Because that is because we are living increasingly digitally. Every transaction that we make, whether it be with governments, healthcare, companies, with each other on social media, every transaction generates data. We have like digital twins on the internet, avatars, accounts with which we interact with each other, with companies. And that really is the new normal. That is the fact that we are living digitally, and that these boundaries between the physical world and the digital world are disappearing. And one evolution that may sound a bit futuristic, but isn't at all, that is, maybe you've heard Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook talk about his big dream, which is the metaverse, what he calls it. He hasn't invented this term. It comes from science fiction literature, actually. And what he means by that is actually a new stage of the internet that is coming. A new stage, a new evolution of the internet. Think of it as the internet 2.0. And it isn't just about screens like it's now, 2-dimensional, but it's going to become 3-dimensional. So we're going to be able to interact with each other in 3-dimensional virtual spaces. It may sound a bit weird, but it's already here. And one industry where we can already see it is the gaming industry. It's a very, very big industry, and it has had a huge growth during the pandemic. The time people spent gaming grew by 39% during last year. So many people are living many hours a day inside these gaming worlds, which are virtual worlds. And it's not just about driving fast cars or shooting zombies. It's much more. They interact with each other, and you see more and more brands and companies entering these gaming worlds to interact with consumers. Epic Games, which is owner of Fortnite, one of the most popular games in the world, they organize concerts inside their gaming world. So famous artists from the hip hop and R&B scene are giving exclusive performances for the gamers inside these gaming worlds. You can buy tickets for them, and you can attend these concerts. Or another example is Gucci, the famous fashion luxury brand. They have launched a pair of virtual sneakers. So you can buy, and you have to pay for it, sneakers from Gucci that you can only wear in digital environments. You can personalize them, all what you want. You can't have them in your closet at home, even if you paid for them. You can only wear them in digital environments. So you see many weird evolutions coming up, and you see that people are comfortable with that, and that brands are starting to understand this. And to prove that it's not just science fiction, I quote the Financial Times, which is a very serious newspaper. And they quoted just a few weeks ago, I saw this title, and they said, the metaverse is the future for consumer businesses. And I quote, they said, high street retail stores have struggled to keep up with the consumer shift online. In the future, the same may be true of companies that are unable to make their products compatible with the metaverse. In other words, we haven't seen nothing yet, I think. So there is an enormous evolution coming up, and I think it's important for companies to be aware of this. And I don't know, David, if you are a gamer. I'm not, but I have a son who is. I don't know if there are many gamers in the boardrooms of the companies that are now listening and watching us, but I think it would be a good idea to have contact or interactions with people who are comfortable in these new virtual worlds to see what's coming up, because it can have a huge impact on every industry, and we don't know when. It may be many years from here, but the pandemic has shown that people weren't even ready for a rise of 50% in e-commerce. So I think preparing for the future is a really important issue there.
Well, to your point on that, I first of all, to answer your question directly, no, I suspect, like you, I am not a gamer, but my son and daughters are happy gamers. But the complexity of what you're witnessing in the gaming world does translate through to different sectors too. For instance, the complexity of what's achievable now in online showrooms is quite staggering to what was there just 2 or 3 years ago. And it means that the consumer suddenly becomes a lot more comfortable being able to select products for their homes without having to go to a physical showroom, which has some quite significant implications. But that kind of technology, which is interactive, means you can walk through a home without having to leave your home on the screen, is pretty powerful. And there's no doubt that many companies are starting to invest in that technology now.
Yes, you remember maybe the first Google Glass that was a huge flop. That was way too early, but now today, new virtual glasses are being launched that are much more elegant and compact and versatile. And that's just one example that you see that, you know, they were too early, and sometimes change is always happening slower than trend watchers predict, but it's always happening faster than we find comfortable. So it's going to come, and we're going to have to be ready for it.
Is there a point here as well that, just to be precise about it, that this is affecting all consumers, or is it certain segments of society and different types of consumers that are taking to this these advances more quicker than others? Because it doesn't seem to be particularly even to me.
No, I think it's partly generational. I think it's younger generations, because the gaming industry is this front runner in this evolution, that you mainly see younger generations adopting these evolutions more quickly. But it's not just people in their teens or 20s. Many gamers are in their 30s or even a bit older. And this will evolve. I mean, these people will get older, and they will become professionals. They will start working. They will buy a house and all that, but they won't stop gaming, because that's, you know, one of their main hobbies, so to speak, or passions even. And so this is going to evolve through society and through all the generations, just by time, just because these people are growing up.
I mean, in the interest of time, I should move on. But there's one question, there's one implication of this that's an obvious one in retail trends, which is, if you are correct, and that the technology is allowing people to pretty well buy everything through digitalization online, is where does that leave the high street? What are the implications there?
You have seen, you're in the UK, I think. I've seen many dramatic articles and figures about vacancies in the main high streets. We see it in continental Europe as well. So you see that retailers are changing course, their strategy, focusing, for example, like big brands are focusing on flagship stores in the big cities, big high streets, and closing smaller stores where they don't need to be, and moving online, trying to keep contact with consumers online. So there will be less stores. They will become more digital. So in the store, you can check the inventory, for example. You can order products that are not physically available in the store. You can interact with, you can look up information. Stores are becoming digital. There will be less stores. They won't disappear. Of course not, because we still love these physical experiences. Shopping is more than just buying. If it was just buying, then everything would go online. It's not just buying. It's interacting. It's a social activity. It's entertainment. It's leisure. So that is not going away, but there's going to be a lot less stores than there are now, and they're going to be very different and much more digital than they were.
Okay, well, again, let's try our first poll if we can work the technology out here, Tom. Yeah. In terms of just simply asking the question, for everyone who's in the audience, just consider this, and in particular, in the way that we look at customers, for our customers, has COVID fundamentally changed the way our customers behave and buy? It's a simple yes or no. If you think it is a small change and it's going to go back, that's one viewpoint. But if you think this is a step change, then please vote that way. And if you could do that over the next 2 or 3 minutes, just whilst we're tidying this particular session up, then we'll find out exactly what those results look like. Really, in terms of the customer behavior, the other aspect I was going to say is there is an international stage to this. Are some countries further ahead of this curve than others? Or is it just simply a global trend?
It is a global trend. There are differences, for example, in Asia, in China, for example. Behavior has become more mobile, so the smartphone is at the center of customer behavior, much more than it is in Europe, for example. That's also because these people didn't have anything else. I mean, we had desktop computers first, and then laptops, and then smartphones and tablets. They just started out on a smartphone. They didn't have anything else, so they do all their shopping, but also all the interactions with, for example, government or healthcare or what you have. Everything is through this smartphone. That's a difference. And you see, for example, something like video shopping, live stream videos where you can shop. That's typical Asian. Europeans don't do that, or not comfortable with that, or not yet. Maybe it will come. So you see differences, but I think it is a global trend.
And finally, just to that point, would you therefore see that some of those trends that are far more advanced in Asia in terms of consumer behavior, that they will translate into more European ones over time? In other words, we should not be resting on our laurels thinking, well, it doesn't apply to us.
Oh no, that's if there's one thing that you should never think that it's not going to happen to us. I think that this is exactly what many companies were thinking before the pandemic. We still have time. No hurry. Our people aren't really ready yet. Our employees aren't really ready yet. So let's just be comfortable. But now we've seen what can happen. You know, in 1 year, we made a 7-year leap into the future, and we weren't ready.
Okay, Tom, have we got any results back from the polling yet? Oh my goodness. Yes. Well, that's pretty straightforward response here, really. You're looking at 79% of the FEST membership really believe that there has been a fundamental shift, which, given your 15 minutes of introduction to this topic, is probably not surprising. You've got to say that what we've seen here, you know, 80-20, frankly, suggests that we are witnessing a step change in consumer behavior. This is not going to return, so we better get used to it.
Well, I am a bit surprised, David, by the 20% that think that nothing has changed. I'd like to talk to these people. What are they really thinking?
Well, I think their interpretation would be that things have changed, but they're not fundamentally not going to go back. So,
Yeah.
you know, for sure.
Mhm.
But it's a pretty open and shut case. So, Stefan, if we could we just move on to something that's particularly topical at the minute?
Yes.
The world of supply chain. And I will just open this by simply saying, certainly in many parts of Europe and certainly in the UK, it's very difficult to go into any retail outlet at the minute and find the shelves full for a variety of reasons. So could you give us your view on what's happening with supply chain, please?
Well, yes, we see that the supply chain today is seriously broken. That's the least you can say. And it's not just in the UK where you have this extra complexity of the Brexit, of course, but it's everywhere. After the Corona pandemic, when everything was down in the industry, now everything at once is starting again. Activity is starting up again. And it causes serious disruptions in the supply chain, supply of resources, raw materials, but also a shortage of drivers, for example. So this is very serious, and it poses retailers for very difficult challenges, of course. You may have heard in the news that IKEA has decided to take matter in their own hands. They don't want to be dependent anymore of third parties, so they are buying their own shipping containers and they're chartering their own ships to organize their supply chain from China and other regions by themselves, because they can't be bothered anymore by third parties who don't deliver. Of course, it isn't that simple. I think supply chain is a very complex matter, and I'm not an expert in this, but indeed, I hear many companies in many different sectors that are now rethinking their supply strategy. I heard an interview with Frans Muller, the CEO of Ahold Delhaize, big supermarket group, who explained, yeah, maybe, he said, we have made the supply chain too complex in order to try to lower our costs. And that has made the supply chain too complex. And he gave the example of frozen shrimps, for example. They source them in Vietnam, but the plastic for the packaging comes from China, and the ink for the imprinting of the packaging comes from yet another region in China. And then when one of these supply chains gets broken, you're in big trouble. So he is starting a project within his company to look at the supply chain to make it simpler and leaner in order to be more resilient in case something else would happen in the future. And one of the sectors where we see made the most radical change here is the fashion industry. You may be, you know how the model works in fashion. You know, collections are designed at headquarters, like here in Europe. And then they place their twice a year, a winter collection, a summer collection. Then they place their orders in Bangladesh, India, China. And then huge loads of clothing are coming in containers on ships to the stores here in Europe to be sold. Half of the collections are not sold in time during the season. They have to be sold at a big discount at a loss during the sales period, like end of the year or beginning of the summer. Then the rest is being destroyed or thrown away. The fashion industry is one of the most polluting industries in the world. And now more and more, they are rethinking their strategy, and they are bringing production back to Europe or closer to Europe. One of the front runners here is the group Inditex, which is the mother company of Zara, for example, the biggest fashion group in the world. And they decided to bring production back. So, and no longer have 2 collections a year, but have like every 2 weeks, they have new collections to enter the stores. They design them here. They produce them in Spain, Portugal, Morocco, Turkey. And they can smaller collections, so there's less waste, there's less loss, and they can react very quickly to emerging trends in the fashion sector. And so they have less waste, and they have better sales, and they don't have these supply constraints. Of course, they still source in Bangladesh and other for less fashionable items that they can order in huge volumes. Of course, they do, but they're really changing. And you see more and more fashion labels now, also here in Belgium, smaller companies even that say, okay, we're getting production back here. And I think there are a few drivers that are accelerating this trend. And one of them is sustainability. Sustainability has become a real important issue for consumers. It seemed to be a bit on the background during the pandemic, but it's back here. We've seen the bushfires, we've seen the floods. It's back high on the agenda for consumers, also for employees. In terms of employer branding, I think it's very important. Companies realize that people don't want to work with a company that hasn't got a real sustainability agenda. They want to have the impression to do something good in the world. So companies are aware of that and are trying to make their supply chain more sustainable. And I think, and I'm very curious to hear the panelists on this. I think another factor may be the importance of wage costs versus the emergence of automation in the industry. You see that in countries like China, Bangladesh, India, there is a rising middle class. These people are not going to work for nothing in these factories forever. They want a better job at better wages. On the other hand, the importance of wages in the cost structure, I think, is declining because you have more automation. You have robots in your factories. You don't have to pay the robots. It's investment. That's different cost structure. They're never ill. They won't go on strike. And if you have a more automized industry, that might be an opportunity to bring it closer to Europe. Maybe it's also important in terms of geopolitics to have more industry back in Europe as well. Because that may be, I think, a third driver. And I'm also very curious to find out what your members are thinking about that. And that's a bit geopolitics, risk spreading. We see now a competition for resources worldwide because there's a scarcity of resources. You see, China is creating this new Silk Road called the Belt and Road Initiative. They want to secure their access to raw materials, to resources in Africa, in Europe, in South America. That's a competition going on. And China is, with all due respect, it's not a free market. It's not a democracy. It's something very different. If Xi Jinping decides something, it will happen. So industries may think of, well, do we still have reliable trade partners? What's going to happen if we get real competition for resources? Is China going to keep this for themselves? Or are we still going to be able to do business? It's a question. I do not know, but I can imagine that some companies are thinking in this direction. I'm not an industrial expert, and I also realize that it's not easy to replace a factory one day from another, from China to Europe.
Well, and I guess that would be my immediate observation, which is, I get your example of the fashion industry, which clearly I know very little about. But, in our sector, I just wonder if we took all the componentry and all the purchasing that is done in, let's just say, the Far East in its wider sense, and we translated that into more local supply chains, whether there would be the capacity within Europe to be able to provide all the goods that we need to make our homes. I don't know what the answer is, but it would seem to me to be a bit of a stretch. But let's get that second poll up, then at least we can get the views not of me, but of the guys who are watching this. So Tom, if we can just have a look at this. This is the whole issue of globalization versus local supply. Is the global supply chain post-COVID now replaced by a much more local supply chain? I mean, this may be a little bit more even-handed, I suspect, but do you believe that we will stick with globalization or become much more local in our supply chains? Please just give me a simple yes or no answer to that. And whilst we're just counting those up, if I can, for the final point on this, can I just ask, I always regard, when we talk about supply chains, that labor is part of this too. You've mentioned the rising costs of the middle classes in India, etc. I mean, one of the big issues that we have here within Europe, for lots of reasons, be it COVID, post-COVID, or even before COVID, is just lack of skilled labor to be able to work on in our factories, on our building sites. Do you see that as being a long-term restriction as well? Because that's nothing that can be fixed overnight. It's a real issue to the supply chains.
It's a real issue now,
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I don't know, but one of the factors, what I mentioned about industries becoming much more robotized in the future, some trend watchers are even asking the question, what will people do like 50 years from now if there is hardly any industrial labor at all? How are we going to keep people busy when there is no more labor? Is not needed anymore because robots are going to do all the work for us. So it's a problem now, but I don't know if it's going to be a problem 50 years from now. But at this moment, it is a problem, and it is in many industries. You see it all over Europe and all over the world, actually. It's also about, it has to do with demography as well. The generations now, younger generations, there are less of them. Because, our society is getting older, so there's a majority of people over 50, and there's less people in their 20s and 30s.
Yeah, and it is definitely affecting the way that we make our products, be that in the factories or on the building sites. There's a greater use, as you mentioned, of robotics, and a greater use of prefabricated or off-site techniques, which reduce the need for labor on site. And I guess that's something that we're going to have to work through because, as we've just said, it's going to be here to stay for some time. So moving on, let's have a look and see what the results of that are. Tom, if you've got any view on that. Yeah, it's a little bit more even-handed, as I suspected. But nevertheless, 57, approaching 60%, believe that the supply chain is going to be replaced by more local suppliers rather than return to globalization, which in many respects is great news, particularly for the whole sustainability debate as well, because we'd like to keep things local. But I guess those that probably voted no may take my view, at least in part, that says, is there really capacity to just simply turn our back on the Far East at this moment? That's a little bit of a stretch. Okay, so thank you very much for that. It's a really hot topic, and I'm sure that the questions as they're coming in, by the look of it, will refer to that, because supply chain is a big issue right now. And finally, and probably, how does all of this feed into the role of the distributor? That's what most of us are here to consider, as most of us are distributors and wholesalers. So if you can, Stefan, with the view of the retailer, please, let's have a look at that.
Yeah, even a bit broader than just the retailer. I think in parallel with this digital revolution that we are experiencing now, we see another revolution, and that is that every company is becoming a solution company instead of a production company. It's happening right now. Companies are trying to stop selling just products and start selling solutions. And maybe a very evident example is Apple. We all know Apple. Apple started out as a computer manufacturer, and then they developed some amazing products like the iPhone and iWatch. But you know, just a few days ago, they launched the iPhone 13. There wasn't really much fuss about it. People weren't really impressed. But that's really normal because Apple's focus is no longer on products. It is on services. Apple is selling streaming services, is focusing heavily on Apple TV, on Apple Music. And so they can bind, or they can make their customers very loyal to these ecosystems that they are building with these services. And that's a long-term view. And of course, people will still need to buy the Apple products in order to be able to use the services that they are offering. But the focus is on the services, and that's where the growth is. See, and we see the same in other industries. Look at the car industry, for example. The car industry is no longer about cars. If you go to the corporate websites of BMW or Tesla or Renault, you'll see that they hardly, in their strategic views, they hardly talk about cars. They say they are becoming mobility service providers. That is the future. And of course, they know why they say that, because the future of the car is no longer guaranteed. If you look at a longer term, it will not be as it is today. Maybe people will want to have individual cars, maybe we'll have self-driving cars. A lot is going to change. And so they are rethinking their business model, and they're going to be solution providers, mobility solution providers. And that is, I think, a very interesting thing. And you see already companies, for example, thinking about, you have the obvious company car. You probably have one, I have one, but maybe in the future we should think about a mobility budget and leave the choice to people if you're going to come by train, by bike, or by car. It's about mobility. You see car sharing platforms. People in cities less and less own cars because it's no use in a city to have a car. And if you need a car, you just get one from a sharing service. You rent a car, and you can go. You see it in the food sector. HelloFresh is a very nice example of food as a service. They're not selling you pots of ingredients. They're selling you a recipe, a menu with inspiration and with just the right amount of products. So you have no waste. You have half an hour of work and you have a nice healthy meal on the table that you probably wouldn't have cooked if you went to the supermarket because you didn't have this inspiration. It's a lot more fun and it's extremely successful. They doubled in size during the pandemic. They're still growing, and it's a completely different business model from the classic supermarket. And it forces food companies also to rethink their business. How are we going to offer people food as a service instead of putting products in the shelves in the supermarket? And even IKEA, the furniture retailer, has started a renting service for furniture. They're no longer selling sofas that we then throw away after 5 years. No, it's going to become a service. We'll give you the furniture for your home. If you want to change it, in kind of subscription service, for example, and you'll be a long-term client. So that's a different way of thinking, and that may have serious consequences. It's now happening in the consumer industry, and of course, in the industrial industry, it may be a very different story, but you may translate it. I mean, we've seen Grundfos are in the panel. They sell heat pumps, for example. But who wants a heat pump? I don't want a heat pump. I want a comfortable home, and I want someone to guarantee this service to me. And if they can do that by selling heat pumps, that's okay. But I think the focus could be, and I think they're all already doing this, the focus is on these service that you provide us. I'm not interested in watching hundreds of different models of pumps in a showroom. You sell me a solution. And I think for wholesalers, this is a double challenge, because on one hand, you offer solutions for the end consumer, but there's someone in between. You offer also a solution model to your resellers and your installers, of course. So that's, I think, a double challenge for the specific industry that we are talking about right now. You're on mute, David.
Yeah. You thought I'd have learned after 18 months. So, Stefan, I kind of get that, but from the wholesaler point of view, the distributor point of view, as you correctly say, we're there to provide a service with products. So it is about looking after, in the main, the contractor and making sure that we have the products that he needs to solve a problem. Yeah. Because very often, the problems are happening at the home. They need to improve the home, or they need to repair the home. Yeah. And these are the services that are being provided. And you are right, and I think the panelists will confirm this in a few minutes, that there have been many more sophisticated models of how to look after, through omnichannel, the contractor and the installer, and through that to the end consumer. And I think that that's a journey that people were already on, that COVID has simply accelerated, which takes it back to the beginning, really. That was happening anyway. but people understand now that they've got to be just very good at that, because the products that are supplied across the counters are maybe not as important as the service and the way that we deal with the customer in the first place. You know, the products will follow bluntly. So it is moving the role of the distributor. I get that.
Yes, and it may be, because I saw an interesting example just a few weeks ago. It may also change the way you are going to sell your products. I saw an example from the lighting industry. That's maybe a very different of how showrooms can change. And that's a company called Light Gallery, which is a store chain owned by Signify, which is the former Philips lighting company. And they see a huge change in the lighting industry. That is, they want to sell connected lighting, so lighting solutions for our homes instead of lamps. So they used to have very big stores with like 3,000 fixtures in it, and you could come in as a customer and then you pick your choice. Now they have designed a completely new concept, much smaller, and you don't see products. You see different rooms, and they'll show you lighting solutions with a touch screen, and you can try out many different lighting plans to see what the effect is in your room, in your bathroom, in your living room. And so you see a completely different store model or showroom model coming up, really designed to sell services instead of products. And I think that was a very interesting way of thinking.
Okay, in the interest of time as well, Stefan, if we just get that final question up on the screen, Tom, that just looks at this whole future role of ourselves really in distribution. Do we really believe, are we moving to a comprehensive service provider rather than just a distributor of product? You know, where's the weight of evidence? It's either yes or no, but it has some fundamental implications for the way that we run our business. So that's my last request on this particular session. If you could just do that. And whilst that's going through the counting shop, Stefan, my final point on this is in terms of the role of the distributor. Does this suggest that the distributor has to work even more closely with the manufacturer, with the supplier, because the supplier is looking after some of the product end of it, but the wholesaler, almost from your point of view, is having to consider the service proposition more than the product?
Mm-hmm. I think it's always a good idea to cooperate very, very closely. I don't know how the relationship today is between your wholesalers and their the producers, the suppliers of the materials. But I think and what you see in many industries coming up is a model that's called co-opetition, which means that you are going to collaborate more closely, not only with your suppliers, but even with your competitors, in order to change the industry and to service your customers and your end consumers better. And you can do that better if you get together and unite your forces and your resources and all your brains in order to find new solutions. So I think this co-opetition model, which you see coming up in many industries, might be an inspirational one for any industry. Yes, it would. I think collaboration is a must, especially if you want for retailers, you know, to compete to giants such as Amazon. You can't do that alone. So everyone is trying to join forces.
Yeah, we do have examples of that, which is becoming more common, which is just end-to-end solutions. So everybody plays their part right until it reaches the end consumer, who's typically one step removed from the installer. So it does go through the whole product life cycle and the service life cycle. Okay, let's have a look at the results of that final, to keep us on time, if we might do. Okay, well, of all of them, that's the most obvious, really. And I guess we shouldn't be surprised by this, the weight of evidence, because this is coming in from largely distributors here and wholesalers who've already recognized that they are really moving much more strongly down the road of service providers rather than simply being distributors of product. And indeed, you know, the weight of evidence shows that those that succeed are the people who most closely provide those services to their customers and do it most successfully. So yeah, that's a pretty convincing result there. So interesting shifts. How COVID probably hasn't changed the way that we approach these questions, but has just brought an urgency to them that possibly wasn't here 18 months ago. So listen, Stefan, that's been really interesting. Those retail trends do have such an overlap with trade distribution. They don't always translate immediately, but they tend to find their way into everyday lives in our sector too. So I'll thank you for that. And really, we should move on and talk to our panelists. So thanks, Stefan. The purpose of this part of the conversation was really just to introduce you to our august body of panelists, and it sets the scene because we're going to take these retail trends and think slightly more focused about how it impacts our world of supply and distribution into plumbing, heating, and of course renewables increasingly. So let me introduce, if I can, these panelists who, as I said, have volunteered, or in some cases possibly been volunteered to sit up there. So thanks. So first of all, our suppliers and indeed sponsors for this particular meeting. We have Morten Bach-Jensen. And really, we should get these cameras back on now, guys, if we could.
Hi, David.
Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. Okay, so that's good. So the technology is starting to kick in. I'm not on my own in this one. So thanks. So Morten Bach-Jensen is Group Senior Vice President at the very global water technology Grundfos, and indeed has brought along some of the Grundfos pumps behind us just to show that. So welcome, Morten, to the panel.
It's a pleasure to join. Thank you for inviting.
That's fine. Thank you. And we have Jonas Brandvold, who's leader of Europe and the Middle East, North Africa for Lixil, and is indeed co-CEO of Growing, part of Lixil. Jonas.
Good morning. Good morning.
Morning. Yeah, there you go. Hey, this is just so easy now. This is good. And from our world of distribution, we have Thomas Stadelhofer, who's acting CEO of Frauenthal in Austria. It's Thomas. He should be there somewhere. He will be there somewhere. But moving on, just whilst he's finding his way through the screen, Kurt Wiesman, who's CEO of Pliga. Of course, very well known to everybody from the Netherlands. Morning, Kurt. That's good. Remco Tolsma, who's Vice President at Technic Uni, who's also over there in the Netherlands with a great backdrop to you there, Remco, I must say. Right.
Morning.
And Hugo Dorr, who's Chief Commercial Officer at the Solar Group, which has a pretty wide product and services range and based in Denmark.
Hello.
Hello. Okay. Welcome. So I think that's pretty well everyone, apart from I can't find Thomas, but I'm sure that Thomas will find his way to us pretty soon. So in this introduction, I've just been collating some of the questions that have just been popping through. And I'll try to see if I can deal with these in some kind of order, although I can't promise it. But I think the first one that's come in, which is actually pretty kind of sensible given the discussion that we've just had, is, and I think probably, if you don't mind, I will go straight to Morten at Grundfos for this one. The question is, supply chains at present are being stretched, and of course, prices are rising. I think we all know that. So how long do you see this lasting, and what may unblock it? What's the Grundfos view on this particular issue? Because we're all conscious of price rises happening very fast.
Yeah, thanks, David, for asking. And we would also like the answer to that question, but let's give it a best shot. I think our best estimate at the present is that what we're looking at now will at the best temper down 3 to 6 months into the new year, and at the worst at next year's end. And there are of course two elements in that. We need to see the main element from our business perspective to be a demand decrease. If we look at Euroconstruct data at the moment, we can see that this year the home renovation business is significantly up compared to the previous years, and Euroconstruct's best data of that is that the home renovations will decrease or fall to a normal level, still a high level, but a more normal level next year. You know, why is it up this year? I think the answers to that has been given: the lockdown economy, lack of travel, lack of consumer and homeowner spending on other things, and the ability to invest in for the majority of consumers' largest asset, namely their home, and improve that, and also the time available, also the availability of time to see the benefit of improving your home since you've been in lockdown economy and at home. So there has been a rise of that. So when we are now exiting the lockdown economy, Euroconstruct and general common sense making will see that decrease, and we will also see a decrease in demand, and therefore both supply chain and also the price levels being tempered down. A second element, not as strong, is of course also the availability of some raw materials. It's a difficult picture because the supply chain for many of our goods and the goods of our colleagues is long, but you know, raw materials like copper, zinc, stainless steels and stuff like that, there we have a supply chain cadence of approximately 6 months to open a new mine, etc. So on some of the more advanced components, for instance electronics, the time to get the supply chain up is longer. We talk 12 to 18, 24 months for them. So we will still see that. We in fact see a shift now in some of the raw materials improving, whereas in electronics is on a desperate rise now. So again, summarizing, our best guess is that the best guess on when this will cool down is 3 to 6 months into the next year, but at least at the end of next year, we will see a more normal situation.
Just from a wholesale point of view, a distribution point of view, how does it look to you, Remco? Because that, you know, obviously the suppliers some way further back up the food chain, but do you see that this is a sort of 3 to 6 month problem, or is this something that you're not quite sure when it's going to work its way through the whole distribution chain?
It really depends on who you ask. It's I think the number one question at the moment. When will supply chains turn back to normal? Of course, we've seen a shortage in raw materials, which leads to a shortage in end products. But we do see that this market is well, getting more relaxed at the moment. So there is a little change. I agree to what Morten just mentioned, that probably this massive rise in demand will go down a bit as of middle of next year. So the whole situation will be going back to a bit more to normal. We see raw material prices going down at the moment. So it won't be as big an issue as it has been this year. However, it does mean that everybody is looking into their whole supply chain to make it shorter, to purchase more locally, or at least at a European scale, rather than depend on very complex cross-border, international, subcontinent supply chain routes, which we've developed in the past. And that's a clear message. Also, I think it increases let's say the demand for a more circular use of materials. And I know many of our suppliers, Grundfos for instance, they are working on that already. But it means that we really have to accelerate that together. So this is really a challenge to the whole chain to work in a more circular way with our products.
Yeah, okay. It does sound like we are in for a winter of having to fight some supply chain issues and further price increases for sure. It's not immediately solvable. Another question on the supply chain, which obviously was linked to this one that's just come through, is, and I think in this instance, again, it's good to get the view of the manufacturers to start with, Jonas, if I may, which is really, how realistic is it? This is almost back to my point. How realistic is it to find suitable capacity for the supply chain closer to home? Are you ready to abandon Far Eastern sourcing and longer supply chains? It's a question of, how realistic is this vision?
Yeah, it's a very good question, David, and I think that the one who could answer that question today in the right way can be candidate for Nobel Prize.
Not me then.
Yeah.
I just asked the questions.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that I will try to do our perspective on it from a grower side, is that it's not expensive, and it will be still competitive to produce in Asia in certain way, components, etc. The thing is, it costs 4, 5, 10, 15 times to ship it. And that is where we don't see a solution of a good balanced way going forward. You could fill a container with components, have zero value when it arrives in Europe. So that is a battle by itself, which has nothing to do with manufacturing footprint where you want to be in the future. To move from the global sourcing, which was decided for many years, which has been a part of our roadmap from the company point of view, it's not something you change overnight. I mean, there is companies on an acquisition list, on an M&A list, which you can go in and see and buy capacity. Zero value on the brand, but you need to have the capacity. But still, it is a 2, 3, 4 year horizon to turn that around. So from my point of view, I think that the balance is always the best word for it. So if you have put all the eggs in one basket, then you have a problem. So I think that balanced approach is the most long-term and most sustainable way to do it, and not either what. So from our side, we will still have an enormous capacity in other part of the world. We need to get the transportation under control in a more competitive way. And it's also very hard to come to Kurt and to Remco and say, and also to Hugo and say, here is a price increase related to this, and these guys are looking into the raw material changes. But this is not anymore a war about raw material. It is we are at war to run a business, and we need to have that in mind, that costs can go up in certain areas which we normally have never talked about, but today we are talking about it, and we need to be as a transparent and honest in that communication, because we have and we are suppliers on a very trusted industry where the free to distribution wholesalers has played a very important role for us as working with strong brands, and without the free to distribution we should never be where we are today. Now we are moving into finding a new recipe on our partnership of how we go forward. And of course, if we take more local production, that will cost us more versus what it is today. We will not solve it before 2 or 3, 4 years from now. But if we can get a grip of transportation, do more proper forecast of our partnership, I think that is the key. If we can get with our partners more insight about your business projection going forward, we can also be much more competitive of finding this optimal solution. But we cannot anymore run a business by 4 weeks lead time and still be competitive on price.
Yeah, that does sound like there's a bit of a reality check here on this issue of local supply versus the trusted routes historically of having some global links as well. So I would get that. So thanks for that. There's one other question which sort of relates in a way back to my point on labor. There's just one, and then we should try to move on to some of the others on particularly digitalization seems to be quite a strong contender here for a topic. But the question that was asked was, if there is going to be lack of labor within Europe for these skilled trades, is part of the solution going to be increased use of offsite production and installed prefabricated components? So if I can, that to me feels like it's maybe down into the distribution world and how we see those working. So Hugo, you've obviously got a pretty wide product range and service range. Do you anticipate the greater use of more offsite techniques rather than simply products that are going to be out there looking for skilled installers to fit them?
Yes, I think that's a very important topic, and it's greatly under leveraged right now, especially actually in my part of the world. I think in the Netherlands, actually, we see quite an interest in this, and it needs more attention. But it's clear that robotics and prefab and those things will get a lot of attention in the coming times. I went to the US looking at this, and it's a big topic there, much bigger than it is in Europe. And we are looking into the Netherlands for leadership on this and try to see how we can support that in the other markets we're in.
Would you say that the US was further ahead in this debate or further behind? I mean, you know, sometimes
when we talk digitalization, not necessarily, but when we talk prefab and offsite, yes, I believe I see much more advancements in areas in the US, at least, maybe not broadly.
That's kind of interesting, because in many regards, in some of the techniques of products, particularly in heating, ventilation, air conditioning, I wouldn't have said that the North American market was that further advanced, but possibly because of their skill problems too, they've had to embrace this whole world of offsite pretty quickly. Yeah. Okay, there's a pretty pointed question here, which is into the role of the distributor, and it's not long-winded at all. It's basically saying, given what we've heard about digitalization, it's going to bring greater price transparency and pressure on the margins on the wholesaler. You know, it's everyone can see every price now. So that's going to put margins under pressure. And how should we deal with this challenge? And I guess that's a classic one for both a supplier and a distributor to consider, because everyone has to share the same margin through the chain. So actually, back to you, Jonas, actually, because I've done a certain amount of work in that sanitary ware bathroom sector, and I know a little bit about the margin pressure and the visibility that can be shown as you go through the wholesaler, the installer, and actually down to the end user. Do you feel that you are accelerating this problem by digitalization and showing greater visibility of margins?
Yeah, so first of all, I mean, we are working with the brand with a lots of interest in many ways, and but we also have a responsibility as a supplier. We have to define our own strategy to be connected with the industry. We cannot sit in our own cocoon and think that this is great for us. Then we also need to take the consequences of it. We need to have connected strategies which is doable in the industry. I mean, if we look at the free to distribution, it's here to stay. We hear lots of examples of Google and Apple, etc. Our industry, I think we should be proud of. Our industry have set the infrastructure of what the houses we are living in today, the plumbing Martin is doing in the houses, etc., and many others. We should never be where we are today as a supplier if we were not having the free to distribution as the backbone of our industry. We cannot survive without the free to distribution. What we need to do is that we need to be open with the challenges Stefan is talking about. But we should not be either too tempted to be an Apple in the industry, because this industry is a very traditional, conservative in a way, but also needs to have a trigger and challenges to become and moving over to a more connected with the consumer directly. And it is also connected to more service. But I will say that from a strategy point of view of how to engage and getting more transparent and consistent, we need to find out as a supplier how we want to express ourselves to the distribution going forward. And we have been struggling that in the past because of that. We wanted to be everywhere at the same time without finding out what the consequences was. But we are very honest and saying that was a challenge for us. We were tempted to go into different channels without thinking. And I think that is the consequence we have to pay for a couple of years, because by not being clear to the market. And we have working the last 1.5 years to really strengthen the strategy we want to go forward with. And now we feel comfortable to also to talk about that internally. So, and also external. So I think that the consumer channel, the plumbers, needs to be a connection between the supplier, distributors, and plumbers and consumers needs to be much more consistent and connected, and not competing with each other, because that is still something which we all want to see coming through. It is that the plumber can stand in front of a consumer and talking about a brand he wants to really promote, instead of saying, no, you shouldn't buy that because you bought it in a different channel. We need to come around that one. Otherwise we will have a problem as an industry.
And yeah, this opening of the digitalization world, which includes potentially pressures on margins, Kurt, from Pliga's point of view, because obviously you've been pretty strong on digitalization for some time, both in the Netherlands and in Pliga. Do you see this as well? Obviously, it's being a good thing, but how do you manage to make sure that it's not a race to the bottom with digitalization in terms of demonstration of margins and everybody being able to see everyone's prices at all times?
Well, thank you, David, for the question. I think it's a fair point, and it's a challenge, I think, within the old industry how to solve it. But it's not only the margin for the supplier or the distributor. For me, there's a big concern on the point that we enable the installers to maintain their margin as well, because they need it to, and we need to protect them in our industry, because I sometimes call them a rare species. We have so much they need to do. We are so depending on the installers to install our products, and there's so much work to do. So we do everything in the possibility that we can to help them and to maintain their margin as well. So it's not only the two of us, the producer and the distributor, but it's also the installer. Yeah, you see here that the digital is the transparency. That's an issue. On the other hand, with a different series, different brands, and you are able to secure the margin that is needed. And it's not only the digital, but it's also, I think, another interesting thing on the margin and the pressures that for example, if somebody buys a product via the internet or via a showroom where he has been consultant, also for an end consumer, it's kind of difficult to accept that if he is buying a product in a showroom, there is some additional margin needed because the channel is just more expensive. So I think that is absolutely a point.
Yeah, that's right. If you're physically got to maintain a series of showrooms, then that is a cost that has to be factored in. It's not going to go away, and there are still plenty of people who want to go to a local showroom. I would certainly accede that. But to the point that Stefan was making earlier, I think that the digitalization isn't just about the digitalization. It's about the wholesaler being able to demonstrate that we're service providers. And being able to make information available and in a way that the installer finds useful when he's going on to sell into people's homes. And I think it is just making sure that digitalization isn't seen as some separate skill that's isolated. I mean, digitalization is here to stay, and it's in everybody's palm of their hands with their mobile phone. So it's I guess it's not a debate. So Hugo, sorry.
Yeah, David, can I add something?
Yeah, please.
So I think transparency, price transparency, is just a fact of life. We need to get used to, and we need to use it as a tool ourselves where we can, and we need to use the tactics that reduce it where we can. But I think in terms of digitalization, it's really super important to lean into the opportunities we have, because there are so many efficiencies we can gain. I mean, when we lean into digital sales, digital marketing, digital self-service, automating the warehouses that we can do once we get on board with digitalization, that's the route we need to be engaged on. And then I think the rest and the talk about transparency is tactics that we need to kind of manage through. So I think it's really important to get on the other side of that and not see transparency as the threat and the central issue.
I think it is.
I fully agree. So
Yeah.
I fully agree on this. It was the question on the transparency, but it brings a lot of positive things and a lot of opportunities for all of us. So absolutely true.
Yeah. Just similar point in a way, but just taking it further down from the transparency to the installer, if I may. The question's been asked that during COVID, the end user, the end consumer, seems to have been getting more involved in the selection of products for their own home. They've had more time, they're living at home, they want to get involved with the product selection. Do you see that as is that going to be a continuing trend, is the question? And if so, how do we react to that? Because almost by definition, you would say that the trade installer becomes more of an installer rather than the product selector. So the question is, what is the role of the end consumer moving forwards? And actually, if I can, Hugo, could I just ask you that question?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think this is going to continue this trend, but I think primarily sometimes when there's a big price transparency opportunity for the end consumer, maybe, but primarily where they're really engaged on the functionality and on the design. I think that's where we'll have the focus. And I think our opportunity, both as suppliers and distributors, is to make it easy for them, to make it easy for our customers, the installers, to support the end consumers on their journey by making apps, configuration tools, whatever. So I think, again, it's something we need to lean into. And the days where you as an installer don't add a lot of value to the product except the installation, I think is, that's where you have to leave behind the product margin as well. I think that's the reality.
Yeah, it is interesting, and I guess it depends slightly on what sector. There'll be a difference between the people who take an interest in the aesthetic products, such as the bathroom, rather than the technical products, such as the pumping system behind the wall. So yeah, I think that would probably be the case. It's moving ahead, but still within digitalization, which seems to be raising its head on many questions in different forms. If with the acceleration in digital tools, is it possible for, and will suppliers continue to develop e-marketing plans which build brand identities, or is it going to go back to more traditional methods of building brand identities? Is it possible to replace all those techniques where you won over the hearts and minds of the installer in a traditional sense? It doesn't matter whether that's a breakfast morning or trips to football, or is the future going to be really about driving e-marketing brands? Possibly, Morten, could you comment on that?
It's a super good question there. I think the correct answer is relatively trivial. But I mean, the fantastic thing about online media is that we have surrogates for everything today. So every means of communicating we can display in an online version. And as we move towards, to use the Zuckerberg language, to metaverse, these possibilities will just get better and better. We have various proofs of it now, also in the lockdown economy. that in fact we have been capable of replacing nearly everything. So could we continue in that way? I mean, there's no way back. Digital ways of communicating, brand building equity is there. But I also think one of the things that we have experienced during the long lockdown is that even though we have surrogates for all ways of communicating, then there is something with human contact that even though it can be resembled online, then it cannot be fully replaced. We have different words for it now: touch hunger, skin hunger, the ability to touch people. That simply can't be fully replaced. The abilities to, when you do things, now our industry is also rooted in craftsmanship, even though we're moving towards prefab and craftsmanship, the ability to do tire kicking, to touch things. And we in our industry, we see it in various development functions, that we have seen a huge request also under lockdown of our development teams that co-develop, live from processes, develop things together to come back to office very fast. I think the same thing we are seeing now throughout our channels with our customers, being it the channel customers or being the installers that we of course also communicate with, a big appetite on also having face-to-face. So we will take in the learnings, and we are taking in the learnings, and we will never move back. So it's not an either or, it's an and that will put us in an even stronger position, in a more blended way of building brands and communications ahead. So I think as it was talked to by Stefan, we have seen 7 years of accelerating in many industries. Homeschooling is a good example, but we are coming out even stronger due to that acceleration in a blended economy, in a blended way of learning now and building brands.
Yeah, you're right. I don't think it is an either or. It's something that's here to stay. So it's a case of running as quickly as you can with the tools that you have to win that race. From the wholesaler distributor point of view, Remco, a lot of the wholesaler distributor life has been around the interaction of the installer that comes in and collects or delivers to site. And that's a pretty physical world. It's not an e-branding world. Where's the balance, do you see, of a wholesaler using e-branding tools and building up customer relationships with digital techniques versus those traditional techniques, which have been around for years and to a certain extent, I feel, will still have a place?
I totally agree. We strongly believe in what we call the omni-channel approach. So as mentioned before, there is a very big urge in the market to really meet again and to touch products, see products, feel products. At the same time, we also see now a new generation of installers starting who don't even start at the website anymore, but they start on search, or they start on platforms, and they all start on mobile rather than sitting behind their desktop, which they don't even have anymore. So it's a new approach to digital where we have to get used to, and also what we have to implement. And at the same time, these same people want to every now and then visit our people and even visit a sales guy. But they are more and more eager to get added value out of all these contacts. If you have a face-to-face contact without added value, they are very clear they don't need that. So that's a big change. There has to be much more focus in every step of the omni-channel approach that you add value. And if you don't add value, stop it or change it or improve it. But that is key.
And do you see, Remco, that if you think about the 100% of your customers that you're dealing with, is there a percentage of them that will take to the digitalization and e-branding tools quicker than others? And are there some of your customers that you might just, as personas, they just don't get it. They just don't want to get it because, in fact, as soon as this dreadful COVID period's over, they'd like to come back to climbing in their vans and coming to see you at 8 o'clock in the morning for a coffee and a chat.
Well, this 8 o'clock, it's rather 7 o'clock in our business.
I like my coffee in the morning.
Yeah. So, but fortunately, they still do. I was in one of the branch offices yesterday at 7 o'clock in the morning, and in fact, it's crowded with vans and people getting coffee and picking up their products. So, fortunately, I would say. So what we see is there's a growing demand for digital, and not only in let's say the commercial part, but also in the information and inspiration part of the business. So installers who want to demonstrate or show products to or solutions to their customers, they are more and more eager to use digital ways. Also, their customers are expecting that. So it's the whole range of things they do where they need digital services from us. So, and I believe if you're able to offer that to your customers, you offer value. And if at the same time you also offer a good cup of coffee at 7 o'clock in the morning, you will have very happy customers in the end of the day.
And David, can I add to that although we talk about different and new things, I would also say maybe it's just like it has been always. You have to be where your customer is, and we just see that our customer is now more digital, so we have to go along and have to be there as well on the digital. But but in principle, it's just be where your customer is, where your customer needs you.
Yeah, I think that's very smart thinking, Kurt. Really, and it's great to hear that we're with our customers on that particular journey. It's not that we've suddenly discovered a tool and we're forcing it upon the customers. Far from it. They're already down there with their mobile phones, and we better be front of screen for them.
Well, that's a nice thing of Stefan just to mention this. We are I think it's kind of easy for us. We just have to listen to the retail. We are just walking behind them, so we just look careful and pick and choose what we need to do. Yeah. And in the retail, they're just in front of us. So it's a nice example to have.
If I may add, David.
Yes, sorry, Hugo.
Yeah, I think digitalization is obviously not something we pursue in its own right. I mean, it's here to support something. I think some of the trends that are really important to be mindful of are things like productivity and competence development are things that I think our customers seek. I recognize there's also a social aspect that we need to find out how can we support that because it's a very lone job to sit in a van and stuff like that. So there's an element of that, but I think there are big drivers around productivity and competence development where we have an opportunity to add specific value. And I think also the sustainability agenda is something that's going to change ways we will interact with our customers. So I think digitalization in that sense can become a tool, but we need to be mindful of what are the underlying things that our customers actually demand.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting debate, but there's so much more to go at now than there was 5 or 10 years in terms of omnichannel. So it's fascinating, and you're right, it's happening everywhere. So it's a case of how we use it. One probably final question. I'm always conscious of time because someone's likely to turn the electricity off on my screen at past. But it's a pretty pointed one that's come in from a distributor that says, if virtual bathroom showrooms are going to be so strong, this relates back to the point that Stefan was making about the shopping experience. Should I continue to develop my showrooms on site? In other words, what is the role for me to have as a showroom if some of the suppliers are going to develop very strong showrooms that are virtual? So I think that's quite a pointed question for the final one. And Kurt, I mean, I really want to come to Jonas on this and make sure we get a view from Grohe, and Lixil, but what's your view on this? It seems like you've got a pretty strong view on it anyway. So thanks, Kurt.
Is that to me, or you would like
to Kurt? Yeah, let's start.
No, well, we just have 20 showrooms ourselves, and so we have a strong opinion on that. Now, I think many things can be done digitally, but in the end, we see that end consumers just want to try and touch the product. So we feel that the whole sales process will change and become more digital and become like a hybrid kind of a multi-channel. But in the end, we see that also during COVID, in the end customer, before he or she makes the decision, wants to touch and feel the product.
Yeah, it's particularly for that. Jonas, would you like to comment on that from the point of view of a manufacturer that clearly has a view on virtual showrooms?
Yeah, I think I support Kurt on this one. I think it will be very hard to go to a digital, so to say, simulation of a bathroom. It's one of the most largest cost you do in a renovation, and I think it will take a long time so we can move over that to digital solution. But it will be an inspiration, correct? And then from that inspiration, you go to a physical place and really touch and feel and get the service around it, the guidance to do it. But then I think that the real game changer needs to be is the connection between the supplier and the distributor, in this case, where the showroom is a part of it, that there is certified installers doing the installation. I mean, if we look at the cost we see in quality challenges, 70% is related to untrained installation. And I think this cannot continue. I mean, there needs to be a connection so we can actually have certified installer who knows the innovation of product we are coming with connection with the showroom presence. I don't think digital showroom will be the solution, at least not within 10 years, but it will be an inspiration for everyone to go and find the real showroom. And then there will be showroom which will never survive because they are not good enough. Yeah, that is also what I see.
Jonas, that's very, first of all, reassuring to hear. And it plays to the point that Stefan made about the collaboration throughout the chain, so that the inspiration can come from the manufacturer, but actually in terms of getting across the finishing line, it is about the householder going into a local showroom and spending time there to finalize that shopping experience, which is, as I say, pretty reassuring for all the distributors who are sitting on bathroom showrooms around Europe at the minute.
But again, I just want to emphasize, there will be a showroom who will not make it. So you cannot only, we as a manufacturer will not support a showroom which do not have a full connection. We will work with a showroom, and that is what we really want to support. So all of us needs to be better to push how great we look like in our industry from that point of view. Yeah, that was.
Okay, well, look,
Morten wanted to. Morten might.
No,
have
I just want to say
view.
there's some great experience there we can take from car purchase, where the cycle of visits to a dealership has gone down over 10 years from some 6-7 visits per purchase down to below 2 now. And then you could ask, do we then need the physical presence like in a showroom? Yes, we need it even more. And the touch points, but the touch points we will have in the physical showrooms will be fewer, but they need to be better. So as the touch points goes down, they need to be unique. You cannot get away with mediocre physical touch points. Nobody will accept that, because you will be much further in your purchase decision when you enter a physical showroom.
Yeah, those, you're exactly right. When people go to the bathroom showroom now, they are likely to go fully armed with the facts, and they need to be dealt with professionally. So I would accede to that.
And also, I just want to emphasize what Morten says as well as a supplier, is that then we cannot have a ping and pong from a procurement point of view when we need to solve a couple of hygiene factors. So the showroom don't undermine what we try to do in another room. We undermine in the showroom because our strategy is not connected. So we need to move the procurement discussion to the procurement discussion and then close that one. Then we need to train and connect our people in the showroom to talk about the brand in what we have agreed we should talk about. Because then we see a scaling, also what Morten said, there will be a cleaning of showroom which are not making it. They are stick to the procurement discussion. They will not be anymore existed, not in our view. But the connected one with the service obligation and trained installation, that is where we want to invest from at least from Global's side.
Well, that'll be great for the end consumer, because there's not always been as professionally dealt with as that, for sure. Okay, guys, time has run away with us, and I'm sort of 4 or 5 questions left, but apologies, we just going to run with those. Are there any final points that you need or want to make that are brief points, or are you're all happy with the responses that you've made? In which case, I would just like to first of all say thanks to you as panelists, and to Stefan for sure for giving up your time this morning. It's been really very interesting, and some of the questions have been quite sensitive, let's say, about everyone's role in the world. But I think we've really started to understand that COVID hasn't just changed things; it has accelerated what was already there by, as Stefan says, up to 7 years. I'd also like to thank all the guys who are out there watching in whatever part of Europe they may be. And thanks for giving up that time this morning. And finally, of course, to Johan Stevens and the FEST team for bringing this together. As I said, it would have been quite an easy option not to have gone ahead. I'm assured that this time next year, that the FEST conference will happen in Lisbon, which we're all looking forward to. As I said, it'd be great to be able to do this and then have a coffee or better afterwards. But meanwhile, I really just do thank you for your time and wish you all the best, at least for the rest of today and the heating season coming through.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for outstanding moderation from you, David.
All right. No, that's fine. That's fine. It's great to see you. So cheers, guys. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.